The presiding archivist called the expunction vote before I had finished crossing the gallery rail, and I understood I had already missed whatever courtesy this body intended to extend us. 900 delegates of the Ostrava Sovereign Assembly sat tiered around the registry floor, robes the color of wet slate, faces turned toward the dais where the Calder Drifts treaty file hung in slow blue rotation above the clerks. Voiding it would take one motion and a show of hands. I had been sent to watch it happen and report nothing more. I had held this posting 11 months, intelligence liaison, second rank, a job whose entire function was to sit in rooms like this one and remember what was said afterward. Command had briefed me twice on my way in that morning. The first briefing was procedural: confirm receipt if asked, volunteer nothing, do not argue the merits of the motion under any circumstance. The second briefing was 4 words, delivered by a man I had never met before that day, who told me to trust the architecture and was gone before I could ask what he meant by it. The archivist read the motion in full, that the Terran Compact's claim to the Calder Drift's 11 systems, recognized under an instrument signed 41 years prior, be struck from permanent record as administratively defective, the territory reclassified as unclaimed and open to the coming resource auction. He did not look up while he read it. 300 hands rose before he finished the sentence. I had expected that. What I had not expected was to be addressed by name. The Terran liaison will confirm receipt of notice, the archivist said, for the record. Every face on the tiers turned down toward the rail where I stood. I had no statement prepared. I had not been told I would need one. I said the only true thing available to me. Confirmed. A ripple of amusement passed the lower tiers. They had expected an appeal, a procedural objection, something to overrule with visible pleasure. I gave them a single syllable and let the silence after it do the rest of the talking I wasn't going to do. The archivist, faintly disappointed, gestured to the registry clerks. Strike the file. This was the part one had actually been sent to watch. The blue rotation above the dais flickered once, then steadied, then began to fold inward, the standard expunction sequence, clean and procedural, the kind I had watched performed on smaller claims a dozen times since taking this posting. I kept my hands at my sides and my face arranged the way command had trained it, nothing in it for the cameras embedded in the gallery rail to find. The file folded to a single bright line and held there. It did not vanish. A clerk leaned toward his console, frowned, tried the sequence again. The line brightened instead of dimming. Somewhere in the lower tiers a delegate murmured to his neighbor, and the murmur spread upward through the rows like wind moving a field. The archivist's hand, still raised in its gesture of dismissal, did not come down. A second clerk, younger, pulled the raw output to his own console and went very still. Archivist, he said, the file isn't failing to strike. It's reclassifying. Active reclassification, registry authenticated, time-stamped to the vote we just took. He looked up the tiers as if someone there might tell him he had misread it. No one did. I had known, the way you know the floor is solid, that something would happen here. I had not known what, because no one on our side had told me, only that I was to attend the vote, confirm receipt when asked, and say nothing else regardless of what followed. I had assumed that meant we'd lose quietly. I was beginning to understand it meant something else entirely. The bright line on the dais split into 7, then resolved into a survey grid of the drift itself, 11 systems, and across every one of them, dense constellations of signal returns that had no business existing on an unclaimed registry. Shipyards. Defense lattices. A standing fleet count climbing in real time as the system pulled live data instead of archived. The clerks stopped touching their consoles. What is this? The archivist said, and for the first time his voice had lost its procedural flatness. I knew exactly what it was. I had simply never been permitted to say so before now. Trust the architecture. 4 words, delivered that morning by a stranger who hadn't stayed to explain them. I understood them now the way you understand a held breath the moment it's finally let go, not as an instruction, but as a promise someone else had already kept on my behalf, decades before I was assigned to watch it pay out. 41 years ago, when the Compact first negotiated registry status for the drift, it was a human cryptographer, Iris Well, dead 19 years now, a name no one in this chamber had ever needed to learn, who had been loaned to the Assembly's own archive division to help migrate their registry architecture onto a more stable framework. The Assembly had thanked her with a commendation plaque and forgotten her within the year. She had built the expunction protocol herself, the one the clerks had just triggered. Buried in its core, sealed under encryption keys no Ostrava engineer had ever cracked because no Ostrava engineer had ever thought to look, was a single conditional clause. If the Calder Drift's registry entry were ever struck while the entry remained under active Terran administration, the system would not delete the claim. It would convert it. Treaty recognition, the weakest legal standing a territory could hold under Assembly law, would become full sovereign declaration, the strongest. Unilateral. Unchallengeable except by war. We had not built an empire in the Calder Drift in the years since that treaty. We had built the right to declare one the instant anyone tried to take it from us, and then we had waited, patiently, governing those 11 systems exactly as a treaty holder should, never once giving the Assembly cause to look closer at the architecture underneath its own decision. The file did not strike, I said, into the silence the archivist had left open. It converted. Under your own protocol. The Calder Drift is no longer a Terran treaty holding, archivist. It is a sovereign Terran territory, declared under Ostrava registry law, by an Ostrava registry system, at an Ostrava vote, with 900 members present to witness the declaration. That cannot be the function of. It has been the function for 41 years, I said. You wrote the maintenance contracts. We wrote the code. The lower tiers had gone entirely still. Above the dais, the live grid kept counting. The fleet figure climbed past what any reasonable observer would have called a treaty holder's modest self-defense allotment and kept climbing towards something that read, plainly, as a standing powers order of battle. Carrier groups, picket lines, a defense lattice deep enough to have its own reserve shipyards. None of it had been hidden. It had simply never been queried, because no one auditing an unclaimed registry entry thinks to ask how unclaimed it actually is. Through the chamber's high glass, where the auction fleet had been gathering in orbit for 3 days in anticipation of an easy unclaimed parcel, I watched the first hull lights shift formation. Not advancing. Simply repositioning, unhurried, to make room. The archivist looked at the grid for a long moment, then at me, and I watched him do the arithmetic every delegate in that chamber was doing at the same time. That a war to reverse this vote would now be a war against a sovereign power with 11 fully developed systems and a standing fleet already inside its own borders, rather than a policing action against an undefended administrative footnote. The math did not survive contact with itself. This session, he said, slower now, will recess to review the registry architecture. A delegate 3 rose halfway from her seat, robes catching the dais light, and got out only recess cannot, before the archivist's raised hand silenced her without a word spoken. There was no motion to overrule what had already been entered into permanent record. There was only the recess, and what came after it. I did not smile. I had been told not to, and I would not have wanted to regardless. There was nothing in me reaching for triumph, only the long, settled satisfaction of watching a debt finally come due on schedule, the way Iris Well had designed it to, decades after she would ever know whether it worked. I gathered my single folder, the one I had carried in only because command insisted I should look like I had something to lose, and I left the rail the way I had come, unescorted, while 900 delegates sat very still around a registry floor that no longer answered to them. Behind me, the chamber said nothing at all. It had finally learned the value of silence from us, 41 years too late to use it.